But welcome everybody to another PCC forum, Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness. This is a student group that is coming out of the PCC program at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where we come together every now and then and listen to some amazing speakers talk about some amazing topics. And we have a terrific one tonight. I should just say I was telling Kerri this, I've been waiting for this topic to come up in either a class at PCC or in a forum for the last 5 or so years. So I'm really excited to bear witness to this. And without further ado, I just wanted to welcome Drew and Kerri and all of our audience members. And Drew, if you could introduce Kerri and vice versa, that'd be awesome. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Well, it's a great honor to introduce Dr. Kerri Welch. We were classmates together in the PCC program, and now we're colleagues as teachers in the PCC program. And there's more details I could know for sure, but I'm going to make up for my lack of details with enthusiasm and praise, because I just think Kerri is fantastic. I think she's brilliant. Every time I've seen her present, it's been so engaging and compelling. To me, she's like Wolfgang Pauli or somebody. She's a mathematical genius. She presents on time. She has a course and presentations on the fractal nature of time and like sacred geometry. And I'm very excited about the course that she's going to be teaching this fall on archeoastronomy. And so this is a little bit of a teaser. I'm going to drop in and give a guest lecture or two in that course. And so, I think Kerri Welch is absolutely fabulous and brilliant. And I'm excited to learn from her tonight.
That was very enthusiastic, Drew. Thank you. Dr. Drew Dellinger, I've known since I started in the program in 2002, though he started earlier than me, I'm pretty sure. He is a master of the spoken word, stands strongly in the lineage of Thomas Berry and MLK as a cosmological thinker, amazing advocate of social justice, human rights, and all around spectacular person to be in the presence of, an engaging speaker. So I really look forward to hearing more about his time in the British Isles and all of the richness that he uncovered from those traditions. So thanks so much for being here, Drew. Like he said, I'm teaching an archaeoastronomy course in the fall, and so lucky to have Drew coming in for 2 guest lectures and Laura Machete coming in for 2 guest lectures. And so we're going to cover so many parts of the world, and from a strong astronomical perspective, and try to get some of those 3-dimensional movements down in our brains and in our bodies and in our own landscapes through a lot of practical exercises. And so we're just going to give y'all a little teaser tonight. I'm going to start out with a little half an hour, 45 minutes, and then Drew's going to follow with about the same. But let's go ahead and just start with a quick little meditation to fully arrive. So just coming into your body and your breath, letting your attention expand with your body. Release with your muscles. Just allowing your attention to follow your breath. As an energy that fills your body and cleanses on release. Just noticing any sensations in your body, any muscle tightness. Maybe face muscles might be a little tight, maybe shoulders, pelvis. And just using your exhale to bring a little relaxation, a little release. Your brain might be active, using the in-breath to recognize and the out-breath to release. Opening up a nice, clear space internally. Be fully present in this moment. A few more good inhales and exhales. Maybe bringing to mind one gratitude before we open our eyes. And take a little stretch if your body needs it. I like to bring the body into the online space so we don't forget we are both things. All right, let me bring up my screen here and we'll jump on into the meat here. I'll tell you more about this place as we delve into the evening. I may come back to this image. But for now, I want to start here, which is where I live right now in Austin, Texas. And this is the Barton Springs pool, spring-fed pool. And this fellow over here is Gary Perez, and he's the first one I heard speak about the White Shaman panel. And I heard him speak about it at a Barton Springs University. So this natural spring-fed pool in Austin is a cultural hub and has been for millennia. Gary Perez is in the Coahuiltecan tradition and a participant in the Native American church. And he did a presentation on the White Shaman panel, which is a huge mural. You can see a little bit of it behind him here in this image in West Texas, quite a ways from Barton Springs. But he talked about this massive artwork in terms of being a map of the land, of which Barton Springs is a part of that map as one of the 4 fountain springs of Texas, as the birthplace of the Coahuiltecan people. And so the mural is a map of the land. It's the creation story of the people. It's the path that is taken on the pilgrimage to gather peyote. It is the story of creation that's told over the one night of the peyote ceremony. And it is also an astronomical map. And so all of these layers show up in this one image that is at least 2,000 years old, if not 6,000 years old. There's a whole complex of rock art in the area, in the Lower Pecos area. At least 300 instances of rock art have been cataloged. And in one of those caves, peyote 6,000 years old has been found. And so this was my first introduction. And what really caught my interest when he was telling this story was that he was telling the creation story about the ancestors following the deer through the underworld and being born before the sun and then being slain by the sun, and the people being birthed after this deer. And then he said, and the deer is Venus. And he didn't say a whole lot more about it at the time, but that got me very curious. And so we're going to enter this story through looking at Venus's cycles. We're going to learn a little bit about Venus before we look at the mural. So if any of y'all were up early this morning, like I was with my restless dog, and you got to see the crescent moon up in the sky and Jupiter and the Saturn, super bright up there just before sunrise. The reason I wanted to show this, though, is because of the ecliptic right there. So this is one of our orientation parts. The ecliptic is the path the sun follows over the course of the year and the night. All of the planets follow the same path because it is the plane of our solar system. Another way to look at the ecliptic is to look at it against the fixed background of stars. So it's not very clear here, but these are all the constellations in the background. And you can see where the sun is. It takes 1 year for the sun to go all the way from one side to the other. Here is the winter solstice. Here is the spring equinox, which we're right in between the spring equinox and the summer solstice right now. So the sun is right here against the fixed background of stars. And then the fall equinox, and it wraps back around again. So you can imagine this whole map wrapping around you vertically. Okay. And so another way to look at this, so a lot of this is looking at these three-dimensional realities from many different orientations to start to try to grok how they all fit together. And so in this one, we have the Earth going around the sun, and it's showing us that same thing that we were looking at. It's showing us how we see the sun, which is there in the middle, from the Earth, against the fixed background of stars. So against the zodiac. And so it's showing us here in this flat disk of our solar system, and it's showing us here how the sun is moving along the ecliptic through each of those zodiacal signs. And so we know that the sun takes 365 days to traverse the ecliptic. And all the planets traverse the ecliptic at different orbital periods. Venus, so this image here is slightly different than the last one we looked at. Now we've got the Earth in the middle. So this is from the perspective of the Earth, what we see. It looks like the sun, that's this big yellow ball here, right here, moves around us. It rises and sets. But this is specifically the path of the sun around the fixed background of stars you can imagine out here over the course of the year. So it takes 1 year to go around. The rising and setting is us spinning around right here in the middle. And so this is showing, okay, the sun, over the course of the year, we see the sun go around once. But Venus is doing a more complicated dance in the sky because she's also going around the sun as we are. And so what it looks like as she goes around is that she does these little loop-de-loops. And it jumps right there because it's a GIF. But there's a little loop-de-loop right there, which is the retrograde period. And it's also the inferior conjunction. So it's when Venus comes between the sun and us, as opposed to the superior conjunction, when she's opposite the sun from us. And these are important for people observing the sky, because you may have heard this Venus referred to as the morning star or the evening star. And she appears as the morning star for about 9 months out of the year. And so that's just to say that every day, if you go out and observe the sunrise, you're watching the sun come up on the horizon in this one spot. And then all of a sudden, one day you see a bright spot above the sun. And the next day, that bright spot's a little higher. The next day, a little higher. The next day, a little higher. The next day, a little higher. And so this is the path of Venus over the course of days, you know. And so every night, they both traverse the ecliptic across the sky. Well, they traverse the path across the sky. They are against the same constellation that's going with them. So they're not actually moving against the constellations. But so as Venus is getting higher day after day after day after day for about 9 months, you know, well, half of that she's going up, and then she's turning around and she's going back down. boop, boop, day after day after day after day after day. Every day at sunset, she's getting a little bit closer to the sun. And then she has her superior conjunction behind the sun. And so now we don't see her at sunrise anymore. Can't see her at sunrise, but she's still moving. And when she comes out the other side, we can't see her at sunrise because once the sun rises, it's daylight. So we can't see Venus during the daylight very easily unless you're really looking. But when the sun sets over here on the other side and Venus is following, all of a sudden there's the evening star right here. And so, and then the next day at sunset, she'll get a little bit further from the sun, a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further. And then at some point she'll turn around and start setting closer to the sun each night, closer to the sun, closer to the sun, closer to the sun. And then she has her inferior conjunction, which is a much shorter period of time. And so she comes inside, in between the Earth and us. And then swoops on back around and keeps moving in that same direction and starts showing up as the morning star again. So the insight that the morning star and the evening star are the same planet requires a certain amount of understanding of the dynamics of the cosmos. It's not exactly straightforward, yet in many cultures we hear of ancient wisdom that refers to two characters that represent the evening star and the morning star as being synonymous with one another. Let's see. The other thing I want to say about the Venus cycle is that the synodic cycle of Venus, so Venus rises as the morning star. She goes through her whole cycle, rises as the evening star, and rises as the morning star again. That takes 1.6 years, okay, before she's coming up as the morning star again. But this time, she's against a different constellation in the background of stars, okay? Goes through that cycle one more time, another 1.6 years later, different constellation in the background of stars. Another cycle. She'll go through the cycle 5 times. So 5 morning star rises, and then on that 6th morning star rise, she comes back to the original position against that fixed background constellation. She rises in the same constellation again, just 2 to 3 degrees different than where she was 8 years ago, because it's 5 1.6 year cycles. It's 8 Earth years, it's 13 Venus years, and 5 synodic cycles, so 5 morning star rises. And then she's coming up in the same place against that fixed background stars again, but a few degrees different. And that few degrees adds up to a cycle of about 1,215 years before she comes back to the exact same place again. So if you're watching Venus, if your culture is watching Venus, you have the capability to count very long periods of time. Okay, I think that's all I want to say about Venus right now. Okay, now let's go visit the White Shaman panel. We're going to start at the Earth at night so we can see where the sun is. We're going to roll her on around just so we can pass the Milky Way in the background there. And then here we're coming. White Shaman panel is on very near at the confluence of the Rio Grande River and Pecos River down here in the armpit of Texas. And we're going to zoom right in to its little spot here on the Pecos River. And it's in this little nook on this cliff face right here. And so it's facing southwest, excuse me. Thank you, Vimeo, for letting me record that video from, okay, I want to go on to the next, there we go. So this is the cave right here. So the cave opening is facing southwest. The mural is in this little notch right here. So it faces directly west. And so from that cave, you can observe the setting sun and stars. So here's another view. The mural is here on the eastern wall of the cave. And here is what we're looking at in one rendition. You can see there's a whole lot going on in this mural. And then we have more digitized versions. And the cool thing about this mural is, well, okay, we'll do this first. First, we're going to look at a couple characters and the deer specifically. So here we have one deer we're going to focus on. And we're also going to focus on these two deer over here in a second as we're telling our story. But first, I want to talk about Dr. Carolyn Boyd, who came to see this mural as a muralist herself. She was an artist, and she came to see this mural and said, there is an immense amount of intentionality in how this was created. This was not just haphazardly images added at different periods of time. She says, I can see the layers. All of the black was painted on the mural first, followed by all of the red, followed by the yellow, and then followed by the white. So the entire mural, they can digitally look at the painting and tell that that was the layering, the ordering of the paint. And this is significant because the colors in and of themselves, not just the images, carry meaning. And so as a muralist, she went there and she recognized this and she says, okay, well, I have to go get my degree in archaeology in order to speak the language of archaeologists in order to tell them what I'm seeing here. And so she did. And right after she finished her degree, she founded the Shumala organization, which is Archaeological Research and Education Center there in the Pecos area that is educating anybody who will come by to learn and cataloging and researching all of the rock art in the area. And she also had the foresight to say, these patterns and these symbols are not something that are that we cannot comprehend. These symbols and patterns show up in contemporary indigenous culture. Specifically, so this is a map of all of the rock art in this area. Come back to that. Specifically, she looked at a lot of Mesoamerican traditions, but the Huichol or Rica, as they call themselves, are one culture that she looked at specifically because they did such a good job of surviving colonization with their culture intact. And she was able to bring an elder, a Wicca elder, to the White Shaman Pandal, to which he said, they're all here. Our grandfathers, 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 they're all here. And started pointing to the images in the mural and naming the ancestors. So this is just a map for reference of the, Aztecan. So Aztec Nahuatl is the Nahuatl again is the Aztec self name for themselves is Nahuatl instead of Aztec. Aztec is the outsider name. And so you might hear it said either way, the Uto-Aztecan or Uto-Nahuatl language families. And so all of this is a pre-contact map. So this whole area is covered in people speaking similar languages. After contact, you can see kind of where pockets have survived. Down here, Nahuatl, here's the Huichol right here. Yaqui, some of you might know from Carlos Castaneda's Yaqui way of knowledge. So these are some of the pockets where this indigenous knowledge has survived. And so that Carolyn Boyd had the thought to go, hey, well, I've seen these images before. Let's go talk to these people and see what we can find there. So this is peyote. This is one of the things that was found in the caves, 6,000 years old, radiocarbon dated, and is intimately intertwined in the story with the deer and the ancestors And let me just do this. I'm going to read to you one version of one of the creation stories. And I'm going to put the image. Well, I will point out this one thing before I do that, that we have 5 central images here of anthropomorphs, Dr. Boyd calls them, holding torches or candles right here. And we have this wavy line running across here, which, you know, we've seen before in boop, 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 boop. Oh, I gotta go through all of this. Where's my, doop, doop. There's our wavy line. And so that's one of the interpretations of this wavy line, is that it could be synonymous with the ecliptic. Okay, so we have these 5 characters kind of providing a little coherence across the whole. Okay, there's a lot here. I'm not going to go into it all, but I'm going to take you back to this whole colorful image here. And I'm going to read to you one of the creation stories. And I might just end there. This is the birth of peyote, and it's a Wikarika or Huichol story. And it says, in the beginning, before the dawn of time, the ancestors lived below in the watery underworld of the West. The world was in a state of chaos and total darkness. Only the moon illuminated the eternal night sky. The first ancestors were not humans, but wolves and serpents and other types of animals. The world was in total darkness and they could not see, so they had to communicate telepathically. It was decided they should journey east in search of the mountain where the sun would rise. Their destination was the other side of the cosmos, Wirikuta, the arid semi-desert above the east, where they could acquire the gift of sight. And they could find Tayari, their heart. These pilgrims formed the first group of Jicareros, ancestor wolf people, who had not yet become deities. They were also the first deer hunters. A deer, Tamatsi Parasika, armed with a bow and arrow, led the pilgrims on a 5-day underworld journey to the east. He was in pursuit of his spiritual being, in pursuit of himself. He was both the leader of the hunt and the prey. Kawi, the caterpillar, marked the trail for the deer to follow. Kawi's path began in the west and followed the path of the sun along the ecliptic to the east, terminating at the peak of Dawn Mountain. Tatewari, grandfather fire, provided the pilgrims with the fire to light the path and to protect them from dangerous animals during their journey. More important, when they arrived in the east, they would need his essence, his fire, to help father-son, Tayao, rise for the first time. When Tamatsi Parasika reached the end of Kawi's path, he found his prey, his spiritual being. For the hunters who had pursued him through the underworld, he shot the deer, who was at the same time himself. Because of this act of sacrifice, his heart, its Iari, was transformed into Hikuli, the sacred peyote cactus. At the same time, a young boy threw himself into a fire in the west and rose through the cave door at the top of Dawn Mountain in the east as the solar deity. The 2 events, the origin of peyote and the first dawn, not only happened at the same place, but at the same moment, precisely at the end of the caterpillar's path, the ecliptic. When the ancestors ate the meat of the deer, they experienced the effects of peyote for the first time. At that moment, they too went through a transformation. They became deities, they became peyote, they became deer, they became stars. And at that same time, their essence was transmitted into and created all the elements of nature that their descendants, the humans, would need to survive. Through the auto-sacrifice, the first ancestors acquired Nirika, sight, and Iari, heart. With the birth of the sun came a dualistic division of the cosmos, day versus night, hot versus cold, rainy season versus dry season. The cosmos were set in the heaven and the deities were born. Everything was put into place. And it was the end of the primordial age and the beginning of time as we know it today. So this same story is recreated yearly by the Wikariko people in the peyote hunt. 5 ancestors, 5 people portray 5 deities, the first one being the deer, who everyone follows. They go to Dawn Mountain. They hunt the peyote like a deer with a bow and arrow, shoot the peyote with a bow and arrow. And so often you'll see these little black dots throughout. And in this mural, it was an atlatl that was being used instead of a bow and arrow. And so this image of self-sacrifice of the deer, in another version of the story, it's the sun that kills the deer. And there's lots of conflation of the identities of the gods and goddesses. They share essences with one another. So like the fire shares his essence with the sun, who shares his essence with Venus. And when the deer is killed, when the morning star is killed, that's Venus rising in the sky before the sun. When the sun rises, the rays of the sun kill Venus. You can no longer see Venus when the sun comes up because it's so bright. The deer has been slain by the sun. The deer has been slain by itself. So by looking at these stories and looking at these images, we can start to unpack what might be being said here. What is the significance of there being 5 humps in this line? Is this a counting of 5 years? Is it a counting of 5 Venus cycles? There's a lot more meaning embedded in this that is worth exploring. This is Carolyn Boyd's book, The White Shaman Mural. She does a beautiful job of scholarly research and looking at not only the Huichol stories, but Aztec and all looking at themes across Mesoamerican cultures and recognizing these reoccurring themes that show up in this mural and other murals in the area. And the significance of the colors is that the black always comes first. It's that watery underworld feminine color. And then comes the red, which is that fire. Then comes the yellow, which is the sunrise. The people carry those candles, and still the pilgrims, with the peyote pilgrimage, the pilgrims carry candles with them so that to encourage the sun to first rise, the yellow being that first sunrise. And when the sun rises at the end of the overnight peyote ceremony, the pilgrims paint their face in yellow. And so there are all these layers of meaning embedded here that are illustrating the cosmic properties that are deeply embedded in the stories, in the being, in the ancestors, in the land, in the map, and in the ritual of peyote. And so I think that's probably a good spot to stop. I could take a few questions now, maybe, and then we'll pass it on to Drew.
It's awesome, Kerri. Thank you. Yeah, if anybody has a question, go ahead and write it in the chat or unmute yourself. The couple that I saw was, I think this was a question about the Venus cycles. Is it always in the same 5 constellations?
It shifts every cycle. Well, it'll stay in the same 5 constellations for a specific period of time. I'm just looking to see if because it shifts 2 to 3 degrees. And so if we're assuming 3 degrees, 30 degrees in a constellation, so it would take 10 8-year cycles. So it would take 80 years for it to shift to another set of 5 constellations.
Thanks.
Yeah, and this is another question I have that's in the chat there. Could the 5 anthropomorphs also represent the 5 cycles of Venus or the constellations. And I was just looking at that, and it doesn't look like their positioning on the ecliptic is aligned with where Venus would necessarily be rising over the course of those 5 years. But I think there's definitely more to look at with that, because while Carolyn Boyd does make some really strong connections, I think there's probably more connections to be made.
Thank you. And then Kerri, I think you had mentioned, Morning Star and Evening Star being two characters. I assume you're talking about Jesus and Lucifer, who are oftentimes called the Morning Star. Is that what you were mentioning, or?
I was unaware of that
Okay.
connection, actually.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Jesus is the Morning Star. I think you can Google it. But yeah, I guess my follow-up question that we can pass on, but if you have any thoughts on it, I'd like to hear. In terms of the sort of astrological wisdom or astronomical wisdom that's embedded in the Christian story, I know there was, Mithraism is arguably a big influence on Christianity, as well as holding so much of this astronomical wisdom. So if you had any thoughts on that, or?
Yeah, we will actually be looking at Mithraism in the course, actually. And just to give maybe I'm not going to get into it now, but one of the things that it seems to possibly be tracking is the precession of the equinox, which is a 26,000 year cycle. And we'll be using some of the work of David Ulansey, who used to teach in PCC, to look at some of those themes.
Awesome. There's a lot of people, so I can't see if anybody's raising their hand or anything. But
oh yeah, there's stuff in the chat. Let me
okay, great.
Find the right spot here. Yeah, so Mayans consider the Venus as the morning star, a symbol and an omen of war. And I think there's also an association of twinship in that tradition with the morning and evening star. Shows Venus association with the 5-pointed star core of the apple when cut. Yeah, nice. Both halves of the morning and evening star of Venus, and the apple is divinely tempting and dangerous seeds. Fall of man. Oh my goodness. So much going on. Yes. Thanks, Jasper. And Rebecca says, in Sumerian mythology, Venus Inanna was in warrior position as morning star and as lover and evening star. Nice. So it would be Taurus morning, Libra evening, and the other two aspects of Venus. I'm not sure I understand that one. Does the native story have any relations with the Navajo peyote ceremonies? Possibly. Peyote actually came in from the south. It only grows in in West Texas and south of there, and so it has climbed in its influence into the Plains Indians further north, but that has been like a post-contact phenomenon, as people try to reclaim heritage. Is one of the ways that it has spread between tribes, and supplanted. There used to be other ceremonies that local tribes did also, and then peyote seemed to supplant some of those older ceremonies. And so I don't know specifically what the Navajo stories are like, but a lot of these themes seem to be very recurrent in many Mesoamerican stories. All right. You ready to jump in there, Drew? All right, thank you.
That was fantastic, Kerri. You are so good at explaining some of that complicated. Let's give Kerri a round of appreciation. You are so good. I mean, I understand the ecliptic better than I ever have before. And the cycles of Venus are not, that's complicated stuff. And you're really good at explaining it. Okay. Let me, before I share my screen and start the PowerPoint, let me just make a few quick remarks. Let me check the time. Wow, that was such a rich presentation. I'm just in awe and inspired and so jazzed by that. That was fantastic. Okay, I'm going to start with a few lines of poetry that I wrote. Can y'all hear me? Okay. Because I do think that this is, as you can tell from Kerri's presentation and the stuff that I'm about to dive into in terms of Britain and Ireland and the Neolithic, 5,000 years ago, we are really talking about a poetic form of consciousness. I mean, we're talking about a real interdisciplinary form of consciousness that connects, early, traditional science, I guess. I mean, it's slightly different than sciencey modern science, but it is science and religion and cosmology and worldview and spirituality and and like when Kerri at one point, Kerri said something about how there's like conflation going on, where like the sun is the fire and then you got the deer and the peyote and they're all the kind of swirling, that's what poetry is, where there's not clear boundaries between things always. And there's certainly not in a poetic, I mean, there's all kinds of poetry. So I try to avoid grand statements and generalized statements, but in a lot of poetic tradition, you're talking about a breakdown of the kind of what we call subject-object dualism of modern consciousness. And it's a much more participatory form of consciousness. And that's really what we're talking about when we think about some of these Neolithic and megalithic sites that I'm about to present on. There's the earth is a living being, a goddess, and we're embedded in its cycles, and the sky is not separate from humanity and from our souls and our psyches, and the sun and the moon are living presences, so this is all a very participatory form of consciousness. So here's a bit of verse. Procession. In the infinite cathedral of night, the crystal tapestry, Pleiades, Aldebaran, Orion, Sirius ascend across the diving horizon. Westering gods circumambulate Polaris, encircle the tree of the world. All that is moves on invisible rivers. All that is moves on invisible rivers, carried by currents, wine-dark waves, where ecliptic meets the druidry of oceans. In the violet night, silver Perseids singe the sky with their fiery touch. Sky is soul, and the stars are all eyes. Sky is soul, and the stars are all eyes. So I want to start with a quote from Anthony Murphy and Richard Moore, who write, "The true unlocking of the secrets of the past lies, we believe, in combining the study of astronomy, mythology, and archaeology. Only where the stones, the stars, and the stories cross can we begin to see the big picture emerging." So I'm going to be presenting tonight on these Neolithic sites of Britain and Ireland. This is the way we would say it in archaeological parlance, because, the land we're talking about now is called the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. But of course you didn't. So we're talking about England and Wales and Scotland and Ireland. But 5,000 years ago, there was no United Kingdom. So the language we use is Britain and Ireland, right? And these Neolithic sites, these megalithic sites, megalith means like big stones, right? Giant, massive stones, megalith, right? So Stonehenge obviously is one of the most famous megaliths in the world. the pyramids of Egypt, these Mayan pyramids. These are all megaliths, right? They're made from massive stones. But they're really about the splendor of the sun and the mystery of the moon. And as I said, it's from within a consciousness. And so these kind of sites are all over the world, really, on just about every continent, and in many, many, many traditions and cultures and time periods. And it's a indication of embeddedness in the living cosmos, where the sky is alive and divine. And it's, kind of one universal aspect of indigenous thinking is this emphasis on cosmology and the oneness of the cosmos. And so we see cosmological imagery, repeated so often. On the cave in Lascaux, there's an image that people think represents the Pleiades. So you have people in these caves in Lascaux in Europe, painting the Pleiades 16,000 years ago. Or you have even further back, you have the Ashango bone in Africa, and where we think a person notched the cycles of the moon. There are these patterns of 29, little, carving marks on a bone that's 26,000 years old. This is the first, as far as I know, this is the earliest cosmological record that we have, the Ashango bone. And it's thought that this may have been a woman marking her menstrual cycle. So I think it's pretty cool that the first cosmologer that we have solid evidence for is an African woman who may have been marking her menstruation. In Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, you have Anasazi Kiva that's thought, the Kiva itself, which is a sacred structure around kind of temple underground kind of thing, thought to represent the cosmos. The orientation of the Kiva is 1 degree, is less than 1 degree from true north. Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. You also have Fajada Butte, where there's a kind of a split in the rock where a shaft of light shines in, and there's these spirals that are carved on the rock face behind, and so a dagger of light can be seen to mark the solstices. But it's also been recently thought that it marks the 18.6 year cycle known as the major lunar standstills, which I'll get into a little bit more. So, for example, here's a quote from Nicholas Campion, who writes, "The core feature of traditional African culture is the integration of the sky and earth and lack of any defined boundary between all living things." There's also a megalithic site, or at least a stone circle, in a place called Nabda Playa in southern Egypt that's thought to be at least 8,000 years old. Some people call this the earliest astronomical, observatory. Basically, I've grown to be very skeptical about any kind of claims of this is the earliest or this is the earliest, because you see so many things like that. And there's Göbekli Tepe, who, if Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is astronomical, which some people think it is, then that would be older, at like 11 to 12,000 years old. So I tend to take most of these claims with a grain of salt when people say things, but people do sometimes say that Nabda Playa in southern Egypt is the first astronomical observatory. Okay. Now let's talk quickly about the Neolithic. The Neolithic in Britain and Ireland covers a period from approximately 4,000 BCE to 2,500 BCE. So this would be about 1,500 years or 60 generations. So you basically have, so before the Neolithic means, of course, new Stone Age, right? So before that, you'd have the Mesolithic or the Middle Stone Age. And after that, you would have a brief period called the Copper Age, but really going into pretty quickly into the Bronze Age. So kind of between the middle Mesolithic and the Bronze Age is this Neolithic period of about 1,500 years. And it's represented by what they call the Neolithic package, which would be like domesticated animals, cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs, domesticated cereals like wheat and barley, pottery, bowl pottery or ceramics, and distinctive stone tools. Like you see these really beautiful ground stone, really soft and smooth stone axes, like that are just, sometimes you'll see these axe heads that are just gorgeous, like almost like polished stone. But the fifth aspect of the Neolithic package would be monuments in wood, earth, and stone. So this is a big development, not just the monuments themselves, but the whole concept of building monuments, what scholars and archaeologists would call monumentality. So monumentality is a big thing when the Neolithic hits. So the Neolithic in the British Isles would start in southeast of England. So a lot of this stuff came over from the continent, is what is kind of thought to be the case. And so you have the Neolithic package kind of starting in southeast England in about 4050 BCE. But by 3800 BCE, it's spread all throughout Britain and Ireland. And so some of the monuments that we start with are like hinges, right? A hinge is, so you have earthworks, like hinges would be these big kind of ditches, basically, where you have like a ditch and a bank and these big circular hinges. Other forms of earthworks you'll also see like human-made hills, like Silbury Hill in near Avebury Stone Circle. But there's something like, and you'll get different, don't take these numbers, or take all these numbers with a grain of salt, because if you read 3 different sources, you'll get 3 different sets of numbers. But here are some from a scholar named Ronald Hutton. He says, at present, 324 British sites are recognized as hinge monuments, many visible only from the air. Most hinges had 2 entrances to allow a procession to enter and leave in a continuous line. Or you could have like 2 different processions coming together through the 2 entrances and meeting. Or you could have one entrance that was used for some ceremonies and another one used for different ceremonies or at different times of year, this type of thing. So hinges are, most of which, they range from 13 feet to 1,700 feet in diameter. And they can be dated most can be dated between 3000 and 2200 BCE. So those are kind of the classic ritual monument of the 3rd millennium. And Hutton says the adoption of hinge monuments in Britain seems to have been extremely rapid. So this is one of the interesting things. But then there's a transition from hinges to stone circles. And that, so stone circles kind of take over from hinges and toward the end of the Neolithic. And according to Hutton, there's some 702 known to survive in Britain and 261 more in Ireland. Another scholar who wrote a book called The Significance of Monuments, Richard Bradley, writes, there's a cultural tradition of circular structures along the western margin of Europe. Virtually all ceremonial monuments constructed in Britain and Ireland between 3000 and 1500 BC were circles of one kind or another. Bradley writes, I would argue that this constant emphasis on the circle reflects a shared perception of the world, a prehistoric cosmology. Okay, so now let's dive into the PowerPoint. And I'm not super, so I share my screen, right? Let me share my sound too. Share. All right, let's see what's gonna happen here. Please restart your audio sharing. Sorry, I'm seeing something here. Just bear with me for a second, if you would. Damn it. All right, hold on. I got to enter my Zoom password. Sorry. Talk amongst yourselves.
I'll just highlight some of the gems from the chat now. Matt Segal says, monumentality, extra points for that gem of a word.
Okay.
And one question came in for me and said, what is the significance of white on the mural, which is a great question, and one I don't have a solid answer to yet. So we're gonna have to leave that mystery to be explored.
All right, I'm gonna try to share my screen again, but not click share sound. Let's see what happens. Are y'all seeing my screen?
Yep, that's good.
Oh, great, great. Okay, fantastic. Okay, let's see if I can start the slideshow. This is only the second PowerPoint I've ever done in my life. So let's see if this works. All right, are y'all seeing this? Y'all seeing Stonehenge with the Milky Way?
Gorgeous.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So I'm going to crank through some of these fairly fast. This is a beautiful shot of Stonehenge. Okay. There's one other thing I want to show first, which is stone. Let me go to Stonehenge. This is a super cool site set up by English Heritage. And let me see if I can make this bigger. This is going to put us in the center of Stonehenge. If I can get this to work right. Try to make this a little bigger. Okay. Skyscape. This is kind of Stonehenge as it is right now at night. Let's get it back during the day. I'm going to click Skyscape right here, which is going to show us. This is, so the Stonehenge alignment is one of the most famous alignments in the world. And I actually don't know if I'm using alignment or orientation in the right way. But if you look, this is this here through, you see that little thing in between there? That's called the heel stone, right? Here, let me put tour here. So it should label it. So there's the heel stone. You see the heel stone? This was kind of the beginning of archaeoastronomy in Britain, when this guy in the late 1700s named William Stukeley pointed out, he said, you know, at the summer solstice, the sun rises right next to or right near, it's not a perfect alignment, but basically close enough. He said the sun rises right behind the frickin' heel stone. And the whole monument seems to be oriented toward sunrise on the summer solstice. William Stukeley, late 1700s. This is kind of the beginning of archaeoastronomy in Britain. People have now much later come to think that as important as the alignment of Stonehenge to the midsummer sunrise is the fact that it also is aligned to the midwinter sunset. So the midwinter sunset would be right on the edge of this massive monolith right here. Okay, just wanted to point that out. Now let me get back to the slideshow. Slideshow, play from current slide. Okay, so megaliths, right? These are called dolmens. I mean, it's a little confusing because there's always like two names for things, and individual sites often have more than one name, but these would be called dolmens or portal tombs. And you have some of these capstones that are so heavy you wouldn't believe it, like 100 tons. There's a lot of these in Ireland. So this is a beautiful one. Here's another example of a dolmen or a portal tomb. There's another one. That's a cool one. So you can see, I mean, some people think that some of these may have been covered up with dirt, you know, so you had a big mound and the dirt just wore away. But, you know, one scholar says it kind of seems like it would defeat the purpose to hoist these amazingly heavy and beautiful stones and then just cover them up with dirt. But that is similar to what they do with passage tombs, which we're about to see in just a second. But so I tend to agree with Vicky Cummings, that they probably, it seems weird to cover up such beautiful work with dirt. Okay, now, but there are also passage tombs where you do have amazingly heavy stones that build these corridors or these chambers or these passages, but then you do cover it up with a mound like this. So you can see why some people think that some of those dolmens or portal tombs may have originally had dirt around them. Okay. This model gives you a sense of, I mean, these are incredibly massive and heavy stones, and then this kind of mound is put on top of them. So this is a little model. All right, here's some pictures of hinges. Here's a drawing of some hinges. This is like, so Stonehenge started out as a hinge, right? Just like a ditch, you know, type of scenario. And then, you know, hundreds of years later, you get the stones inside the hinge. Okay. Like I said, the hinges give way to stone circles. And so stone circles seem to have taken on the role or the function or the importance of hinges. But oftentimes there'll be stone circles within a hinge, but they also are built without a hinge as well. All right, so here are some pictures of stone circles. This is a picture of Avebury. Avebury is a little north of Stonehenge, but fairly close, like close enough where you could have like a ritual procession from Avebury to Stonehenge. Avebury is the biggest stone circle in the British Isles, and it's so massive that there's a huge stone circle, and then there's like two interior stone circles, and it's so big that there's a village that got built inside the big outer stone circle. That's how big Avebury is. And it's really a whole complex. The situatedness, the site selection is pretty stunning. Oftentimes they're built near the coast. This is a tiny little collection of stones here, and that may have been a burial cairn, but it's 4,000 years old, and this is on the Isle of Skye. This is kind of the view. It's not a bad place to be buried here on the Isle of Skye. All right, so now let's talk about Newgrange. This is a massive passage tomb in Ireland. This is like, an hour from Dublin, right? On the East Coast, basically. It's along the Boyne River, which is an incredibly significant site in terms of Neolithic art and monumentality. Here's an aerial view of Newgrange. I mean, this thing is huge. It's massive. Passage tomb or chambered tomb, passage grave, chambered grave. So here's Newgrange. There's another main one and some others called Knowth. Here's one called Douth, and these are all along the River Boyne and the Boyne Valley. And so this was a center of art and monumentality. You can see, look, passage tomb, hinge, passage tomb, and hinge. And a lot of amazing artwork, like carved stone spirals that we'll see in just a second. And there's, there's both in terms of myth and legend, a connection quite possibly between the River Boyne and the Milky Way, which is often in many cultures conceived of as a river, right? A river along which, and a pathway and a road along which the spirits of the dead travel to the other world. So there's a lot to say about that, but here's kind of some stones, some giant stones outside Newgrange. These are pictures that I took when I was at Newgrange. So around Newgrange, there's like 97 of these massive stones that are called curb stones, right? This is kind of like the backside of the mound of Newgrange. Boom. You can kind of see some of the carved stone spirals here. Let's see. Here's some more of the carved stones with like some lozenge kind of lattice stuff and some spirals. Okay, so The Newgrange alignment is almost as famous as the Stonehenge alignment. It's one of the most famous alignments in the world. And here's a little video that shows the sun. So the rising point of the sun moves during the year from south to north. There'd be the equinox in the middle, right? So this is how the rising point of the sun moves along the eastern horizon, and the same way that the setting point of the sun moves along the western horizon from south to north. At the summer solstice, it's as far north as it gets in the northern hemisphere. How do I get to the next slide? So this is kind of a diagram of Newgrange. So it has this interior chamber or passageway, right? And at the winter solstice, guess what happens? Here's kind of a diagram. You can see that it's the interior chamber is made from massive stones. This is the front of Newgrange. This is this incredible. I mean, this is one of the finest examples of Neolithic rock art, just plopped right here in front of the entrance to Newgrange with these amazing spirals. So this is all like, basically everything I'm going to show you is about 5,000 years old. I mean, Newgrange is a little older, more like 5,200 years old. We'll look at Maze Howe, that's more like 4,800 years old. But if you think 5,000 years old, older than the conventional dates of the pyramids of Egypt, this is the range that we're talking about 5,000 years old. So when this was kind of excavated and restored by an archaeologist named O'Kelly in the 60s, they couldn't at first figure out what was going on with this square opening above the door that's called the roof box, sometimes called the letter box, until he just on a hunch, and also based on some kind of local legends he had picked up, he decided to go inside at the winter solstice. Guess what happened? So at the time of the winter solstice, and only at the time of the winter solstice, the rising sun shines through that aperture of the roof box, and it shines all the way down that incredibly long passageway that's 62 feet long, and it lights up the central chamber. And sunlight even falls on these amazing triple spirals that are on the back wall, basically on one of the stones back there. So this was stunning. Here's kind of an image. This image was taken at dawn from inside the chamber at Newgrange. Here's a kind of a diagram of the solstice sun shining into the central chamber. I mean, the doorway wouldn't do it. If the sun was just shining through the doorway, it would boom, it would hit like right here, right? It's got to have that aperture, that roof box, for it to reach all the way in, all 62 feet into the central chamber. And these are the triple spirals inside the chamber at Newgrange. Okay. So now let's move from Ireland to Scotland. This is it's hard to see this map, but this just gives you an indication of all of and these probably aren't even all, but there's something like 900 to 1,000 megalithic sites that we know of. There probably were a lot more. So I want you to think of not just in terms of sites, but really think in terms of complexes. And so that's kind of what I'm going to get into next. And really, even beyond complexes, think of a whole landscape. I mean, they really created a cosmologically based ritual ceremonial landscape where people could be processing from one site to the next. I mean, it's pretty stunning to think about. This is so I'm going to invite you to come along with me. This is what it looks like when you fly into the Isle of Lewis, which is one of the Western islands off the west coast of Scotland, what's called the Outer Hebrides. So the Isle of Skye would be the Inner Hebrides, and the Isle of Lewis is one of the islands of what's called the Outer Hebrides. So this is a picture of Calanus. also called Callanish. A lot of the reason why there's two names is because you have like the Gaelic, original Gaelic pronunciation, and then you have like the more anglicized English pronunciation. So the English pronunciation would be Callanish, but the more traditional Gaelic pronunciation would be Callanis. Oops, this is a little speed tour that I shot when I was there with my iPhone. So this is kind of the main Callanis site. Here's a nice view of it from the air. So you have this kind of, so you have this tallest stone in the middle. You have this circle, and you have this kind of cruciform, or kind of almost like a Celtic cross type of shape. All right, keep an eye on the time here. Okay. This is, skip this. This is another video. So these are all shots I took of Callanis. Whoops. So I'm here in the Outer Hebrides on the Isle of Lewis at a 5,000-year-old stone circle megalithic site known as Callanis or Callanish. This is, it's got a central circle with long row of stones and two wings. So it's basically in the form of a cross. And there are 12 standing stone sites within 5 kilometers of Callanis. So it's best understood not in isolation, but as part of a ritual landscape that was sacred and deeply cosmological. Okay, you hear that? 12 sites within 5 kilometers? I mean, you're just tripping over these things left and right. Okay. All right, here's some more shots of this. So this is one that's just very nearby called Callanish 2. Let's see, I lost my cursor. Okay, here's Callanish 2. So you can be at Callanish 2 and you can look over and you can see the main site. So like imagine you were doing some kind of rituals or ceremonies at Callanish 2 and you're looking up just, half a mile away or so, and there's rituals and ceremonies happening at the main site. You see what I'm saying? So, I mean, I don't know if that's what they were doing or not, but you have to imagine a lot because we don't have like real strong records of what was going on. This is Callanish 2. So like the main site of Callanis is just like over here, it ain't far. This is Callanish 3, which is again only a few hundred meters from Callanish 2. And just beautiful landscape. You can see the sounds and the ocean, the water there. This is this is Callanish 4, which I just stumbled upon driving down the road around sunset. And I was like, I looked up on a ridge and like, wow, there's stone circles up there. Let me pop up there and watch the sunset with some, 4,000-year-old standing stones. All right, I'm gonna skip that. Here's the sunset from Callanish 4. Okay, here's one called, I don't even know how to pronounce this, Klocksteinagard. This is further south. Lewis and Harris are basically one island. They are one island, but they're kind of referred to as two. So the north part is called Lewis and the south part is called Harris. But you can see how remarkably situated this standing stone is right over the Atlantic Ocean. And I'm going to get into, okay, here's more of this one. This is apparently part of a larger stone circle, but even that's controversial. Some people are moving away from that theory, apparently, I just read. So you hear a lot of this. A lot of people don't agree on a lot of this stuff, but this is a remarkable this is a drawing of what they thought it kind of looked like, looking out over these islands. And there was like other standing stones on different islands. So again, you can imagine a ceremony happening on the equinox or one of the solstices, and you have a bonfire and the ceremonies and chanting and singing, and you're looking over to another island and they're doing the same thing, potentially. This is what the sunset looks like from this standing stone. And so, okay, this is another stone that's nearby. Okay, so now let's go to a different location. Now, instead of the Western Isles, we're going to go to the north of Scotland. And off the north coast of Scotland is a chain of islands called the Orkneys. And the biggest island is referred to as mainland, even though it's an island. It's called mainland Orkney. And this is a remarkable area archaeologically. And it's called, like there's a thing, it's called a World Heritage Site, right? It's called the Heart of Neolithic Orkney. It's called a World Heritage Site. So we have the Ring of Brodgar of an original 60 stones, there's 27 that are left. Let me show you an aerial view of the Ring of Brodgar. There's an aerial view of the Ring of Brodgar. So we have about 27 left of what are thought to have been 60 stones. This is huge. I mean, it's 341 feet across. And it's set within the circular ditch, which is pretty massive too. 10 feet across, 3 to 6 feet deep, dug out of solid bedrock here on the mainland island of Orkney. Here's another aerial view of Ring of Brodgar. That's a nice view. So it's on this remarkable little isthmus that's called the Ness of Brodgar. And this is one of the most important archaeological sites. They've been uncovering like massive, huge temple structures here and excavating it each summer. But anyway, and then right near, there's my son there at the Ring of Brodgar. This is kind of where they lived. This is nearby to this, all part of this Heart of Neolithic Orkney World Heritage Site. So this is more like what their cribs looked like, where they lived. This is called Skara. This is another view of kind of, so these houses were kind of like half dug in, you know, it's so windy up there. But part of the idea is that it was a little less wet and cold, you know, 6,000 years ago, and that these Orkney Islands may really have been like the center of Neolithic culture in some important ways. And that a lot of these ideas, like, so that the Ring of Brodgar and the stones of Stinnes are, as well as Calanus, are thought to be some of the earliest stone circles, and that these may have spread south. But again, you'll always find somebody debating these things. So right near the Ring of Brodgar is these other standing stones called the stones of Stinnes. You can see how tall and how thin these are. They're really remarkable. And they were thought to be like originally 11 or 12 of these, and now there's like 3. Plus this little guy over here. Okay. This brings us to Maes Howe, which is very nearby as well. I mean, I had a whole thing set up on Google Earth where I could show you how close these are, but I don't think I'll have time to really get into that aspect. But it's remarkable. If you do want to explore some of these on Google Earth, you'll see how close Skara and Ring of Brodgar and Stones of Stinnes and Maes Howe Passage Tomb are. So this is Maes Howe. This is one of the most famous passage tombs in the British Isles. And here's kind of a faraway view. Here's a closer view. There's like the entrance. So very similar to Newgrange, except at Newgrange, the light shines into the passage tomb. It's winter solstice sunrise. In Maes Howe, the light shines in at winter solstice sunset. So the last maroon rays of the setting sun would shine down the passageway into the central chamber at Maes Howe. Though I did just read something where somebody's questioning that again. Somebody's always questioning this stuff, but so many people talk about this alignment. So this is really famous. So some people were saying that there was more to it originally, so it didn't quite happen on the solstice because the chamber tube was longer originally, but really you'll read a lot about this alignment. It's, you know, it's almost as well known as the one at Newgrange in terms of the winter solstice sunset. This is what it looks like, the interior of the chamber at Maes Howe. So there's a lot that we could say. I want to kind of keep cranking along. There's a lot we could say kind of mythically and mythologically and symbolically, you know, like what this represents. And again, a lot of this would just be speculation. We don't have any written records, of course, but, you know, it's like there's definitely kind of a union happening between the sky and the earth. The chambered tombs could represent like the other world or the underworld. I mean, kind of in the way a cave can represent the other world or the underworld. These could be kind of like human-made caves, right? And you could have initiation ceremonies. Obviously, there's a lot having to do with the cycles of death and rebirth, and communion with the ancestors. So there's a lot to this, and there's more that I could say about this. But let me keep going. Okay, this is considered by some to be the tallest standing stone in Scotland. This is on the Isle, back on the Isle of Lewis. Okay, so let me come get close to wrapping up here. Let me just check my notes and see what else I wanted to share real quick. Okay. Let me read.
There are a couple good questions that have come in the chat too, Drew. If you, I can read those to you if you're interested in doing them now, or just wait.
Absolutely. Let's wait a little bit. Yeah, I haven't been able to look at the chat at all. I've got too many. Okay, this is a little bit from, but I would love to, entertain this briefly. So let me try to wrap up quickly. So this is a little bit written by a scholar named Vicky Cummings. She says, archaeologists have discovered that passage graves also have distinct acoustic properties. When people sing and make noise within these monuments, such as banging a drum, it can create Helmholtz resonance. This is the effect produced when you blow over the top of a bottle. The same effect within a passage grave, however, would have been very unsettling for people within it. I think they would have attributed the phenomena to otherworldly beings, such as the dead, spirits, or malevolent forces. People are also studying, it would obviously be more intense inside the chamber of a passage tomb, but people are also studying the acoustic properties of stone circles themselves, and that there may have been a way in which the stone circles, these acoustic effects of people singing or chanting or playing music within stone circles may have been part of the whole experience. But here's Cummings again. I like to think of passage graves as places of transition from the living to the dead, but also places where the living underwent altered states, perhaps as part of rituals developed for rites of passage. We might envisage younger members of the community entering the monument, engaging with the dead, participating in a range of otherworldly experiences, and emerging as adults. When you visit these sites, imagine all this as you look around. What would it be like to spend time within the chamber, surrounded by the dead, only to emerge into the light on midwinter morning or the darkness of the longest night? People who have done it describe it like being reborn. So perhaps these were places for both life and death, the end of one year and the start of another, places where our world connected with other worlds. This would make them incredibly powerful and significant sites in the landscape. And just one quote from a guy named Andrew Sherratt. He says, any account of prehistoric Europe which omits a consideration of mind-altering substances is likely to be incomplete. So there's a lot that we can imagine in terms of singing, dancing, processions, sacred plant medicines, things like this, ceremonies, rituals. Okay, so now I'll just wrap up with two last things real quick. One is, I want to tell you about a study that was done. We don't have time to go into, a brief history of archeoastronomy, but it's been real controversial. There's a lot that I could say about it. I'll just hit a quick 30-second highlight. There's a long history to it, but one of the keystone events in terms of British archaeoastronomy is when a guy named Alexander Thom published a book in 1967 called Megalithic Sites of Britain. And he was a well-respected scholar and engineer who had spent decades surveying dozens and dozens of sites. And so he kind of broke the whole thing open. But there was also a guy named Gerald Hawkins around that time who wrote a book called Stonehenge Decoded, which got really popular. And Hawkins claimed that Stonehenge was like a Neolithic computer and a very precise observatory. And a lot of archaeologists in the mainstream said, this is too much. Hawkins is way overstating the case. And so there was a lot of mainstream archaeologists who rejected the idea. And there was a lot of kind of prejudice in the sense that these people were farmers, like there's no way that they were aligning their monuments to the solstices and the equinoxes, and particularly not the 18.6 year cycle of the major lunar standstills. So, there's been a very tense relationship between archaeoastronomy and mainstream archaeology. But 4 or 5 decades later, mainstream archaeology has had to accept that actually it does seem pretty clear that there were major that these ancient people were doing this, were aligning these to the solstices, the equinoxes, the major and minor lunar standstills, the rising of certain constellations like Orion, like the Pleiades, etc. And so that just is a little background for you to appreciate this. In 2016, Gail Higginbottom, Dr. Higginbottom, is about to drop a bomb on people. She says, this is an article, you can read, I've read her actual report, but she did a survey using computers, right? And computer analysis. And so this is kind of a popular, this is from Astronomy Now, or whatever. But the first, the title of this article is Britain's pre-Stonehenge megaliths were aligned by astronomers. And first sentence, University of Adelaide research has for the first time statistically proven that the earliest standing stone monuments of Britain, the Great Circles, were constructed specifically in line with the movements of the sun and moon 5,000 years ago. The research, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science, uses innovative 2D and 3D technology to construct quantitative tests of the patterns of alignment to the standing stones. And so what Higginbottom and her partner, Roger Clay, found out, their research and their computer modeling showed that there's a 97% chance that not only were sites like the stones of Stennes and Calanus aligned to the solstices, but also to the 18.6 year cycle of the major lunar standstill. Higginbottom says, nobody before this has ever statistically determined that a single stone circle was constructed with astronomical phenomena in mind. It was all supposition. Higginbottom again, this research is finally proof that the ancient Britons connected the earth to the sky with their earliest standing stones, and that this practice continued in the same way for 2,000 years. Okay, so the last thing I want to close with is a little bit of a description of Calanus, right? So we looked at Calanus. That was the big one that's in the form kind of like a Celtic cross from overhead, sometimes called the Stonehenge of the North. But one of the things, Stonehenge is, Calanus is very far north. It's at 58 degrees latitude, which means that when I don't have time to really explain the major lunar standstill, but basically a quick explanation is, the moon has rising points that vary from north and south the same way the sun does during the year, but it's on more of a 9-year cycle and an 18.6 year cycle. And so every 18.6 years, you have what's called the major lunar standstill, which means for a period of time, the moon rises farther south and goes lower against the horizon than it does in any other time. And then 2 weeks later, it will rise further north, so further south even than the sun at winter solstice. This is again all from the northern hemisphere, right? And then just a couple weeks later, it will rise further north than the sun at the summer solstice, and it'll go higher across the horizon, and it swings from these northern and southern extremes, you know, on a 2-week period. And that happened. And then 9 years later, you have what's called the minor lunar standstill. It's not as exciting. It's the rising points are much closer in. So every 9 years, it goes from the minor lunar standstill to the major lunar standstill. So it's 18.6 years between the major lunar standstill. But when you get to a major lunar standstill, and you're at a very northerly latitude, like Calanus, 58 degrees on the Isle of Lewis in Western Scotland, the southern rising point of the moon, the moon would rise so far south and would go so low across the sky that from that very northerly latitude, it would seem as if the moon is huge and just barely skimming across the earth, right? And you have this testimony, if you will, from certain Greek writers like Diodorus of Sicily, who wrote about what they called Hyperborea, which means the land beyond the north wind, right? And so there's two Greek writers, at least two, that write about Hyperborea. There's Eratosthenes, who said that there was a Hyperborean temple that was winged. That's very interesting when you think about Calanus. And then Diodorus of Sicily wrote in 55 BC, there is also on the island a notable temple, which is spherical in shape. The moon, as viewed from this island, appears but a little distance from the earth. The god visits the island every 19 years. This is a fascinating bit from Diodorus of Sicily in 55 BC. Some people have thought that this might be referring to Stonehenge, because it is a circular temple on an island, the island being, you know, England. But it actually fits Calanus better. And here's Gerald Ponting, who writes, the facts fit Calanus well. For spherical, read circular, while east and west rows could be the wings. 19 years is close enough to 18.6. For the god, read the moon, which does remain a little distance from the earth at its southern extreme. In June 1987 and in September 2006, observers standing in the avenue witnessed this extreme lunar event as the moon rose briefly out of the sleeping beauty, which is what the kind of mountain ridge behind the Calanus is called, skimmed along the horizon and set briefly before reappearing among the stones of the circle. So if you can imagine, you're at this temple of Calanus, there may be singing and ritual and ceremony going on. The moon rises at this most southerly point in 18.6 years. It emerges out of these hills that are called the sleeping goddess, or the woman of the Moors. And so and it's even been said that it appears to be birthed out of the thighs of this mountainous ridge behind the monument. It skims so low across the horizon, then it disappears behind a hill before reappearing apparently in the center of the stones, of the Calanus stones. And it's even been said, just briefly, before it disappears again. And it's even been said that the moon, when it reappears, quote unquote, in the center of the stone circle, that a person standing in the right position would be silhouetted by the moon. So you can imagine, a shaman or a priest being silhouetted by the moon during the time of the major lunar standstill from the stone circle of Calanus. So that's basically my presentation. I'm going to close with a very brief poem, and then we'll have any questions for me or for Kerri. Here's a short poem that I wrote inspired by some of these travels, that's called Midwinter. When midwinter sunrise shines down the passage tomb, how can we not dance? How can we not live again? When the breathing light of the nearest star illuminates the bowl of bones, how can we not dance? Sing our dead across the river of souls. Come into the consciousness of clouds. Come into the consciousness of megalithic structures, the frequency of the flickering flame. the blushing sky, the naked night, the psychedelic stars, taste communion. The substance of the universe, this is my body. The consciousness of galaxies, this is my blood. When the living God that is the sky makes elaborate patterns, kiss, and the stars show their fiery wings, how can we not dance? How can we not live again? All right, that's it for me. Let me escape. How do I stop share?
Drew, that was amazing. Thank you. And you know, the chat was firing up here, so I don't know if we'll get to everything, but if anybody has a live question, I'm going to prioritize those first, and I'll just like continue reading along the way. But one person is, or Matt is asking, you know, the sort of the difference, you know, as people were saying it's imperfect, and there's a question regarding whether the precession changes where the sun rises relative to the Earth's horizon, and whether the precession is throwing off this difference over time.
I don't understand. I'm not an expert in a lot of this stuff. I would say that it does change a little bit, so that they, of course, now they all have computer programs, so you can see exactly where the sun would rise at 3600 BC, and you can see exactly where it would rise at 4200 BC, you know, BCE, if you get what I'm saying. So all of these things can be modeled with computers now. And then there's different, some people think that I mean, if you get into esoteric stuff, I mean, there's that might not be accepted by mainstream archaeology. There's people who will tell you that encoded within Stonehenge is the exact dimensions of the earth, and that they understood these things, and that they brought, and that there was connections between Egypt and the Orkney Islands, and they needed readings, if you will, from two different latitudes and things like this. I read one thing interesting recently where it said, you know, in a lot of indigenous cultures, there's kind of a taboo against pointing directly at sacred things. So this person was speculating that they may have made the alignments slightly off for that reason, like intentionally, so they weren't pointing directly at the sacred thing, if you catch my meaning. So there's different schools of thought on this. Some people say that they were more into like symbolic alignments and not as precise, whereas other people are like, no, they were very precise. You know, and it depends on the site, and it depends on the scholar. So there's just, it's kind of you know, a lot of different opinions on things like that.
Do you think pole shifts could have had a process with that too? Because we've had polar shifts that happen on our Earth time and time again. And, you know, like with, we'll say, I mean, I walk a native walk, and, you know, we have stories about full worlds, and each world's destroyed. And there's a connection with like type of pole shifting that goes in that could cause to be just a little bit off.
There are people who have speculated like that. It's some of the more esoteric. I've seen things. I wouldn't necessarily have any idea whether to give it any credence or not, but I've seen people say things like Stonehenge is much. You'll notice that I said that these sites are older than the conventionally accepted dates for the pyramids of Egypt, because there's a lot of unconventional speculation that the pyramids are much older, that human beings are much older, that some of these megalithic sites may be much older. So I've heard people speculating that Stonehenge is 250,000 years old rather than 5,000 years old or 4,000 years old, and that some of the alignment of the way Stonehenge is oriented would be pointing to where the pole was 200,000 years ago, if you get what I'm saying. So there's a lot of different stuff, and some of it you have to take with a grain of salt, but some of it, you know, may actually be more accurate than some of the mainstream archaeology. So it really can be hard to tell.
And Kerri, if you want to get in on any of these questions.
I was just going to say on Matt's question, whether the precession of the equinox affects where the sun rises on the solstices. I actually had to look it up, but it does not. It affects, the precession of the equinox is the time of year that the solstice is, but it still is going to rise in the same place against the horizon. But the date will shift.
Thank you. I feel more oriented in the cosmos now.
I will say one thing before we run out of time. I'm happy to I think we should go for a little while longer, but I just still wanted to point out that the next major lunar standstill is going to be in April of 2025. So if anybody from PCC wants to rent a house on the island of Lewis,
PCC retreat.
That might be a good time.
Isle of Lewis. Let's do it.
Drew, in both, when you talked about the major lunar standstill and the minor, you talked about a period of 18.6 years.
Between the minor and the minor, and between the major and the major would be 18.6 years. So it's roughly 9 years between the major and the minor and the minor and the major.
Which is actually with the nodes of the moon, that's the same period of time.
Interesting. The moon is very complex in terms of its movements and things that I barely understand, that Kerri and many of y'all probably understand better.
Sabina, I appreciated your other question on what the population numbers might have been during these times, if you had any ideas as to that.
I don't know myself, but I will say that there's a lot of speculation about how some of the process of building some of these monuments might be as important as the finished product themselves. Some of these apparently were never finished, and so in terms of like social cohesion, like getting people together to do a big project and kind of uniting communities and different communities, there's a lot, and some of that may have been like hierarchy, and some people might not have been so psyched, and maybe only the elites were buried in some of these tombs. I mean, usually these things weren't like mass deposits of bones and stuff, but more like a few bones and like symbolic. So maybe only the elites were involved inside the chambered tomb or inside the inner circle during the ceremonies, or it might have been very important for social cohesion. I think at the Ring of Brodgar, they've done analysis of the stones and found that there are stones from all over the island of Orkney. So maybe each community is bringing a stone to the stone circle, so there's a lot of speculation in terms of what the social function and the social organization of these were.
I love the way that you say they were bringing a stone, in their pocketbook?
Well, as you know, there's a lot of questions about how they dragged these massive stones along the landscape. And, in terms of Orkney, some people have speculated that they may have been using seaweed, which is very slippery. And, you've seen all the things about how they may have put them on logs and rolled them along, and this type of thing. But it was pretty interesting. They did an interesting series of the BBC, I think did, or something, where some people experimented with moving a massive stone and throwing down this very slippery seaweed on the grass and then dragging a stone along, and it seemed to work pretty well.
Yeah, I think it's a good point about just archaeology being a pretty positivist discipline, I guess, and you're sort of only left with these artifacts. So sort of reconstructing the experience from that is quite limited, and yet it's it's possible and it's fun. And on the other hand, we could be rewriting potential injustice, like hierarchies that are very much dominating the people. So appreciate you sort of bringing that up.
Yeah, and some of these sites maybe have been used for cremation of bodies, and like liberating the soul, the spirit and the soul. There also may have been human sacrifice going on, that's not at all unheard of in human history. So, there's just so much that we don't know. So it could have been singing, and it could have been human sacrifice, and it could have been both, we really don't know. And different things happening at different sites and different time periods, of course.
There's one question here, what it felt like to actually be at these sites. Did you feel these, connected to these thousands of years old places?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to claim to be a super, medium or to have had any mind-blowing, knock me to my feet mystical experiences, but absolutely, even someone as dense as myself could pick up on a real air of mystery and energy and sacredness and numinosity. So yeah, that's part of why I find these endlessly fascinating, and I've been, really taken with learning and reading and visiting for the last 6 or 7 years. And that's part of it. There's a real spirit and a real energy. And I've heard from, of course, there's lots of reports of people having real mystical or energetic experiences with the stones, touching the stones. I know a woman who told me where she's actually seen little green men and aliens inside stone circles, and she was absolutely serious, and I believed her. So, I'll just throw that out there as part of the phenomenological record.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah.
I just want to thank both of you for bringing this to us and bringing it into PCC, because wow, archaeoastronomy it's like, I don't remember this being taught ever in my time as a student, and I'm really glad, Kerri, that you're teaching that course, and Drew bringing your knowledge. You said Laura Machete also is going to do some cameos. That's awesome, because I mean, yeah, like archaeoastronomy is pretty speculative. So there's plenty of room for the metaphysics, right, which is starting to come up now. Like, what was the worldview of these people? Clearly, it was a poetic cosmology. They were participating with the sky, and the sky was like, as you convey so beautifully, Drew, the sky was like, it's the face of God. It's just looking at you right there. It's kind of hard to miss. And there are all sorts of patterns. There's communication trying to take place, right? And these people were tuned into that, and clearly trying to, like, in some way mimic what they were witnessing below, and like creating these rock poems, right? And clocks, computers. I mean, that we talk about our advanced technologies, which our spirituality nowadays is all caught up in computers, right? I mean, that's where the mana is for our civilization, and we're like manipulating inanimate matter to connect with something invisible, right? And these Neolithic peoples were rearranging matter to connect with something visible, but there was more. I think they were seeing more than we can see now, maybe. But megalithic metaphysics, I haven't heard that explored very much. And people talk about aspects that are metaphysical, but I think it could be itself a new philosophical discipline. So let's create that right here, right now.
I love that. What a great phrase. I want to mention one thing before we close quickly, which is there's a journal now called the Journal of Skyscape Archaeology. And I highly recommend that you check out the Journal of Skyscape Archaeology. It's the only journal that I've ever subscribed to. I mean, I've got an individual subscription. It probably costs like $90 a year or something. But here's a book. Liz Henty is one of the kind of founders of, can you see what this says? Visualizing Skyscapes, Material Forms of Cultural Engagement with the Heavens. So this is a whole collection of essays by Liz Henty, who's one of the editors, or if not the editor, of the Journal of Skyscape Archaeology. And there's lots of people who are still using the term archaeoastronomy, but there are some people who are now using skyscape archaeology instead of archaeoastronomy. And so these people have a really good approach where they're very scholarly and very rigorous, but they're not like totally reductionist or positivist in terms of some of the prejudices of mainstream archaeology. So I highly recommend the Journal of Skyscape Archaeology. And and also some of you know what Nicholas Campion and those folks have been doing at the Sophia Center in Wales. But I really wanted to mention the Journal of Skyscape Archaeology, and Nick Campion's involved in that somewhat too.
We got a question or some wonderings from Josh here. Are there some folks throughout Britain and Scotland sharing stone moving techniques and similar ceremonies? Also wondering other examples of ritual landscapes like the Ohio earth mounds. And if either of you have any recommendations for rituals that could offer locally around solstice equinox when we don't already have ritual landscapes nearby, and a nod to the paving over of so many.
Well, I'll just quickly say that I'm very, I'm definitely open to some of the more esoteric interpretations from like somebody like Graham Hancock, and and he's got a recent book about how like Atlantis may have actually been North America, and something like the Serpent Mound in Ohio may have been oriented to the solstice like 13,000 years ago, and that there may have been humans here like 100,000 years ago. So you're getting into some things where mainstream archaeology and mainstream scholarship would get nervous pretty quickly. But I'm definitely open to some of those interpretations and somebody like Graham Hancock.
Kerri, do you have any rituals around any of these?
I think it's, I mean, there are so many different themes that can be brought in. One of the exercises we're going to do in class is just to make a sheet or a hoop that marks the solstices, sunrise, the lunar standstills, that you can take with you anywhere and lay that down and sit on it, orient it north, south, east, west, and know, okay, what are the markers in this landscape that would show me those furthest extent of these heavenly bodies rising and setting. So you can do that in your room, in your house. You can do that on a mountaintop nearby, and we're also going to practice going out into the landscape, finding a place where you can observe the sunrise or the moonrise or the sunset or the moonset at least once a week, or if not daily, if you can, so that you can start to get an actual embedded feel of how these movements play out around us. So I think that would probably be the most important thing, which I know Josh does already very regularly, to go mark the solstices, and he has a great ritual that he likes to do of a spiral path that he takes of a number of different places to visit in a spiral shape around the Bay Area on the solstices. And so very much encourage, whatever feels sacred to you. Yeah.
I want to chime in quickly on that. That's great. I love this idea of this hoop. I'm so excited just imagining that. But I also want to bring in a little bit of Thomas Berryism here too, because I think this is part of what our work, us as PCC, other people who are into this, drawing with respect from indigenous traditions as appropriate. But it's part of what Barry was saying is that we need to mythologize the scientific story, right? And we need new ecozoic rituals and ceremonies, and we should be celebrating not just like Christmas and Hanukkah and Thanksgiving and the 4th of July, but we should be celebrating the moment when the supernova exploded that would later form the solar system and the Earth. And so I think that part of why I'm so excited, as someone who studied with Thomas Berry for 20 years about these 5,000-year-old Neolithic and megalithic sites, is because to me it's an example of a cosmologically embedded culture, and that we need to, they may have been had quite the time developmental consciousness of the universe story that Barry would advocate that we need to mythologize and ritualize and ceremonialize the universe story, but they clearly were embedded in a cosmological landscape and framework. And so I have a poem where I say, reorient our buildings to the solstice, and from the center of the city, see the stars. So I very much am longing to do this type of thing where let's develop the rituals, let's develop the ceremonies, let's develop the songs. I don't want to, chant some cheesy, chants, but I want some world-class artistry and some world-class, ritual leaders and ceremonial leaders like we have here, like we have in these indigenous traditions. And let's mythologize not just the universe story, but the solstices and the equinoxes. And of course, we know this is happening, in various ways, but let's reconnect with the major lunar standstills and the minor lunar standstills, and let's create these rituals and these ceremonies and a culture and an architecture that's re-embedded in the cosmos and the cosmology.
Right on.
I had maybe a comment and a point. I do a Hopi walk. I walk the Hopi Red Road of the Southwest, and I've been walking this road for about 16 years, 17 years. And the Hopi are known as the most traditional ceremonious. So the whole year is the ceremonial year. And so we live in ceremony daily. So, and we also walk with particular kachinas. There's about 10 major kachinas in the walk that we really honor through the year, and they follow their year is known as the planting year. So we do everything around the planting and the time of the seasons. And then there's the dances, and then there's of course the kachinas that come, and then the kachinas go at the end of the year, like right before, I think it's after summer solstice, they go back up to the mountains or the Blue Mountains, and then they come back after the winter solstice. So when we call back the sun. So as the sun's at its highest, and then as the sun's at its lowest. And so I just think it's really fantastic and phenomenal. Just I've always studied different cultures, and I'm an anthropologist at trade because that's what I got my bachelor's in. And so, and I did my minor in archaeology. And I just think it's just so fascinating to see how these cultures just kind of similarly line up to each other and work together in this way, in the whole importance, like the whole conscious level, and with the whole universal thought and theory process. If we don't have this cycle of the ceremony and walking and breathing the ceremony, we don't have an earth cycle. We are losing, part of that existence in ourselves. And I think that's one of the biggest things with indigenous groups, that they understood that, yes, you can live your day, blah, 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 but you also have to honor your path, your walk, the cycle of the way the earth turns, honor the beings that have come and gone, honoring the things that come to be, the things that you'll learn. So I think it's fascinating. I'm actually taking both your classes this fall, and I'm really excited to dive in and see more. And I love the hoop thing. I've never heard of the hoop. We do a cornmeal circle, and we have markers for the directions, and we call in. And actually I'm training to be the ceremonial leader in my community. So this will be fun to see how your class teachings go in with what I'll be walking and doing with my teacher. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
That's great, Heather. And I'm going to hush up, but I'm just going to say one last thing. I love everything that you said. And I just want to add that, for those of us who are, white folks, European Americans, one way to connect with our indigenous roots is to connect with Celtic cosmology and to connect with the Celtic calendar. And so in the Celtic calendar, you have, of course, honoring of the solstices and the equinoxes, but also the cross-quarter days, right? So this is a very cosmological calendar. We just celebrated Beltane, right? And then there's, Imbolc and Samhain. And, I don't know a lot about that, but I know a little bit about that. But I think that's part of this kind of re-cosmologizing modern, US culture in certain ways.
I was wondering, Drew, if that is part of what drew you to start exploring stone circles with it from your personal heritage.
Absolutely. I've got Scottish on, on my dad's side. We've got MacLeods, as well as Irish on my dad's side. And I've got Scottish on my mom's side with Maxwell's. So yeah, that was definitely part of my interest. But even if I didn't have that family connection, I would probably be interested in Celtic cosmology, which is something I would know a little bit about, but I'm eager to learn more as well.
Nice. Well, if anybody has other questions, definitely would love to hear them. I think I've got like 15 more comments to go through, so it's either going to be me reading them or you asking them. But one thing that was interesting was how this, something that's so central to, different people, right? It survives through generations. And so, just thinking about, druids, right? And like the mythologies that astronomical wisdom really comes into. It was just interesting seeing, I felt like I saw at least a couple of crosses, in there that seemed to predate Christianity. So I was just thinking, on the one hand, we tend to sort of think of Christianity spreading, but at the same time, it's a very syncretistic religion. So you've got all of these, cultures from around maybe the empire sort of converging in this one symbol, which seems to maybe have an astronomical origin. Anyway, so I was just thinking of, King Arthur and Merlin as these sort of two different pieces of this interaction. And anyway, so that was what came up for me. I don't know if you have any thoughts on King Arthur and if any, and Druidry or anything like that, but love to hear your thoughts on that. Otherwise, I can move on to another question.
Yeah, I'd move on. I mean, I don't think we have to go through all the questions necessarily, but whatever you want to do is fine with me.
Cool. Well, we were also, it is 8 o'clock, so this is the sort of time we are have dedicated to this, but we usually go for as long as people stay on. So if anybody wants to drop off, and you're not required. I know, Kerri, you're probably a little later than us over here. So anyway, I want to thank you all for being here, and this is the last one of the season. So Kerri and Drew, it was great to kind of end so many good presentations with yours. And for anybody who is not enrolled in the school, you can definitely check that one out with Kerri and Drew, or Drew's class with Thomas Berry. It's certainly something you can audit or join the program, right? I think we'd love to have you. And just it's been so fun sort of listening to so many great presentations. So I thank you all for being here in the audience or being here as a speaker. So
let's hear it from Matt Switzer for organizing a fantastic semester of PCC Forum.
Thanks, appreciate
Thanks to you, Kerri. It was really awesome to present with you.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. I really enjoyed getting to cross-fertilize and see what you're bringing there from the British Isles. Is the British Isles an appropriate way to refer to Britain and Ireland?
As far as I know, it is. I did have one person who was saying that kind of leaves out Ireland, but then they're like, oh no, I guess you're right. The whole thing is the British Isles. So the British Isles, I think, is technically correct, but most there's new books by archaeologists and scholars that tend to say Britain and Ireland. So I tend to go with Britain and Ireland.
I got in trouble for that once too. You have to add Ireland.
And then Kerri, is there something you want to say in terms of kind of where you're going in this class, maybe as a sort of final thing, and the other sort of pieces you're going to put to this? This is a good beginning.
Let me see if I have the book right here. Celestial Astronomy is kind of what we're structuring from, which is it's just an overview of lots of places in the world. And so I'm going to be kind of coming from an astronomical perspective and saying, how do we understand these cycles that were being marked? We're going to have a lot of different examples of specific sites that were being marked. I'm going to have people choose sites that they want to investigate more specifically, present to the class, be observing, developing their own relationship with land. Maybe because of Josh's questions, we'll have people develop some ceremony to go along with their observations. But that's kind of the general thrust that I'm shooting for.
That's awesome. Great. And then Drew, since we're here, do you want to share a little bit about your class as well?
Absolutely. Well, I've taught a lot of Thomas Berry over the years. I mean, I first met Thomas Berry in 1990, and was able to enlist him as a mentor because he's just so gracious and generous. So he really was like a mentor figure for the last 19, 20 years of his life. And so this will be the first course at PCC dedicated to the work of Thomas Berry. I mean, for those of you who don't know, and I think there's some who don't know, I mean, Thomas Berry was one of the founding thinkers of the inspiration for the whole PCC program. And Brian Swim, of course, very much has carried that lineage. You know, Brian and I have both studied with Thomas Berry, and I've also been mentored by Brian, as well as other folks like Matthew Fox and Joanna Macy and Miriam Gillis and Charlene Spretnak. So I've been blessed with a lot of teachers and mentors, including many of you all in the PCC program. So this is going to be, I think, so Brian, of course, has been carrying this cosmological torch and this interpretive, poetic, cosmological worldview from Thomas Berry, and adding his own, you know, special flavor and deep knowledge of physics and astronomy and cosmology. But this is going to be the first course. And so Brian Swim has been bringing Berryism into all of his courses and all of his teaching and all of his writing for decades. But it's still the case that this is the first PCC course dedicated solely to Thomas Berry. And it's going to be a real deep dive. And we're going to be reading Berry, and I'm going to be telling you stories about having Berry as a mentor and traveling with Berry for 19 years. And I've got notebooks full of quotes that nobody else has. So I'm very thrilled.
And a killer impression. Killer impression.
I am going to be unveiling my Thomas Berry impersonation as well. But apparently the course filled up on the first day, and they were talking about doing a second section. So I wouldn't wait too long if you're interested. I'd love to have you join us on this journey into Thomas Berry's cosmology. I think he's really relevant. I mean, I continue to be interested and impressed in Berry, not just because I know the guy or knew the guy, but because I think it's really pertinent and really relevant and really important still, you know, all these years after his death in 2009. So I think that people are going to get a lot out of the course. I continue to find it really compelling and engaging and important for the present and for how kind of prescient and groundbreaking he was. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome. And I have to say, I'm just very, it's fun to see three people who have gone through the PCC program and are now teachers at the PCC program. So it is beautiful. I can't think of three people who would be better. So glad you're here. And with that, we are officially done.
Thank you, Matt.